Our first plenary session this evening is being offered by Brother Michael Perry. As a Franciscan, Brother Michael has served as an educator in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the Office of International Justice and Peace at the USCCB, with Franciscans International, an NGO at the United Nations, and later in peacebuilding at Catholic Relief Services. He served as Minister Provincial for his province, then as Vicar General, and then as Minister General of the Franciscans. He completed this service in July 2021. He currently serves as the Director of the Laudato Si Center for Integral Ecology at Siena University, working closely with 2 other friars from his province, 6 students, and 3 lay volunteers. Please join me in welcoming Brother Michael.
Well, good evening to everyone. It's an honor for me to be here. I'm going to jump in. There's no slides tonight because I get lost when I do slides, and then it becomes really a mess. So it's going to be rather, I hope to keep you awake, and if not, just raise your hand and we'll serve cocktails and move on to the next session. Pope Leo XIV, Bob to his friends, writes at the closing of his first encyclical, Dilexite, Christian love breaks down every barrier, brings close those who were distant, unites strangers, and reconciles enemies. It spans chasms that are humanly impossible to bridge, and it penetrates to the most hidden crevices of society. By its very nature, Christian love is prophetic. It works miracles and knows no limits. It makes what was apparently impossible happen. Love is above all a way of looking at life and a way of living it. A church that sets no limits to love, that knows no enemies to fight, but only women and men to love, is the church that the world needs today. End of quote. It's with this thought I'd like to begin a reflection tonight, the heart, what I'm perceiving as elements that contribute to the heart of our Franciscan charism, driving forces in forming and orienting the Franciscan movement, pastoral power in action. I am, of course, speaking about the power of Franciscan fraternity and community. I hope to make a compelling argument that the call to renew daily our commitment to living the gospel life necessarily includes a renewal of our minds and hearts to recommit living this as brothers and sisters, bound by one and the same prophetic love we're called to share with others, especially with brothers and sisters who are impoverished, excluded, marginalized, whose fundamental rights and dignity are not respected. This prophetic love embraces the entire created universe, as Pope Francis argues compellingly in his encyclical Laudato Si, underscoring the intrinsic connection and the indivisibility between the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. It's this unity of prophetic love that provides us with a means for reimagining life, reforming the way of our lives, or coming to new ways of seeing, of believing, of living. In Franciscan jargon, we do penance, we practice the gospel life, doing, practicing. Connected with this orienting principle and source of energy, Franciscan fraternity and community is a second and intimately related Franciscan pastoral modifier, proximity to those who are marginalized and impoverished. One might argue that Franciscan fraternity and poverty serve as complementary push and pull factors in the Franciscan movement. Fraternity grounded in interpersonal relationship whose source is a God who participates in a triune relationship of fraternity of mutual shared love, is what propels us to move about in the world. But this movement in the world is not one of disconnected vagabondism. Please permit that word. I was going to take it out, but someone told me leave it in. Nor is it simply outwards, as we are propelled by love to enter the ongoing process of the unfolding of the universe. we are invited into a simultaneous movement, one that moves us closer to the heart of God, of each other, and of the beating of the universe itself. The movement towards the outer and inner boundaries of the unfolding universe is guided and propelled by a fundamental relationship, a friendship into which we are being drawn by the Most High Good Lord. But this invitation to friendship is simultaneously a call to recognize all that exists, human and non-human, as fellow travelers and co-sojourners, brothers and sisters, to borrow the kinship language from St. Francis's Canticle of Creature. Love of God, love of neighbor, one single and constant narrative in the great story of creation that even now is unfolding. Many of us have heard, or probably had some chance to read a little bit of the Passionist historian, he's an historian of culture and religion, the eco-theologian Thomas Berry. He says this: the greatest of human discoveries in the future will be the discovery of human intimacy with all those other modes of being that live on this planet with which we exchange the very substance of life. Pope Leo in Dilexite draws upon biblical texts, the writings of the Church, fathers and mothers, and the principles of Catholic social teaching in developing his strong argument for the unity of interior religious belief and exterior actions, faith and love. For Leo, the only genuine way of validating one's relationship of love with the Creator is through the lens of love in action towards all whom and that the Creator loves, human and non-human. Citing the letter of St. John, we are reminded that unless love is expressed towards those whom we see, how can we love someone we do not see? It is precisely this concrete love of neighbor that provides energy, purpose, and direction to the Franciscan movement in all of its varied missionary and pastoral expressions and actions. I further believe fraternity is intrinsically linked with a Franciscan radical turning towards and living among those who are impoverished, excluded, marginalized, among a wounded creation, engaging us in responding to this one solitary movement of cry of the poor, cry of the earth. The vital link St. Francis established between fraternity and the impoverished, marginalized, has been well developed by any number of scholars, maybe several present here tonight. One article that struck me years ago was written by Michael Casado, and never has left me, Wall-to-Wall Ministry. I think it was published in a book, which, Keith, you were participant in that work years ago. Casado links the earlier physical relocations of the first fraternities in Assisi to the movements of the poor, landless, marginalized people who experience frequent displacement due to the expansion of the city and the demands of those economically more powerful, a process we call gentrification. As the city expanded, as walls were constructed to protect those considered worthy of protection, the impoverished found themselves forced to move to new peripheral zones. Fired by a desire to imitate the poor crucified Christ who had no place to lay his head, Francis and his earlier followers, friars, laity who embraced the gospel proposal, sought to dwell among the impoverished and marginalized, serving the lepers and others, God's privileged ones, sharing their space and their condition. No doubt this had a tremendous impact on the lives of the friars, their relationship to one another, and the quality of fraternal life, especially since there were few other guarantees to moral and material security. Consequently, the link between fraternity and evangelical poverty provided energy and vitality to living out the gospel life and evangelical poverty. I suspect it also resulted in a very powerful, positive externality, a witness to pastoral love in action, endearing the friars to the impoverished and marginalized among whom they cast their lot. And not only the friars, that first earlier form of secular Franciscans and others who got caught out, they got energized by this movement. I believe this explains in large measure why the early friars, imperfect as they were so loved and respected by the people. Willingness on the part of the friars to embrace the life of the impoverished and marginalized, to subject themselves to the costs that would be required created space in which holy newness could emerge. We know from the earlier biographical materials how those less poor and even the rich found themselves being drawn into the circle of love and liberation generated by the Franciscan movement. The example of Clare and her sisters, and that of the lay individuals among whom counted early secular Franciscans, further enlarged and deepened the impact of the early Franciscan movement, one of a fraternal, pastoral power of love in action. Tonight I've chosen, we'll stop for history for a moment, our history lesson, and move forward to more recent events. I've chosen for the approach tonight, one of storytelling, to reflect on the central themes of this conference. Storytelling powerfully conveys vision, values, the purpose by transforming abstract ideas into relatable, emotional, and memorable narratives that foster connection, build trust, inspire action, and simplify complex information. Storytelling within a Franciscan vision is deeply rooted in the life and the witness of St. Francis of Assisi and the Franciscan spiritual and intellectual tradition. In fact, most of what we know about St. Francis comes to us through some of the greatest storytellers of the movement: Celano, Bonaventure, Francis' closest companions, and maybe those who weren't so close, and outsiders who witnessed the transformative power of the Franciscan movement. Our brother Richard Rohr reminds us that storytelling is essential for spiritual transformation, moving us beyond the limited my story and our story to connect with the story, the universal patterns of God's unfolding in the universe, fostering connection, healing, a larger sense of purpose and belonging. It can serve as a powerful transformative instrument, moving us to seek to embody, share, and sustain central and core Franciscan values, such as fostering a loving relationship with God, fraternity as love in action, the privileged place of brothers and sisters who are impoverished and marginalized, the minority as a means for entering into the experience of the poor crucified Jesus. It is in this embrace of minority that generates a willingness and a desire among the members of the Franciscan movement to expand the boundaries of missionary pastoral action and love, to include even all of creation. It's precisely here where the Franciscan movement links its story with the ongoing great story of the cosmogenesis. We discover the nature of our true vocation as co-participants, co-creators in God's movement of healing, reconciliation, and liberation. As the writer to the Colossians reminds us, for God was pleased to have fullness dwell in Jesus, and through him to reconcile himself to all things, whether on earth or things in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. It is this vision of incarnational theology that is at the heart of Franciscan movement, pastoral power in action, a power that is reconciling, unifying love. And I hope these stories that I will share with you tonight will reflect some of this. They're taken from what some people call the peripheral zones of the world, regions of the world. And we know that that was a theme in the pontificate of Pope Francis. But you also have to keep in mind when Pope Francis actually went to these places, they became the center of the world. And so it's very important. It's not a peripheral world, it's a polycentric world. And if we think of a polycentric world, what can we learn from that experience? It changes our perspective completely. But before stories, a little reality check. God works best, it would appear, at least as understood from within a Franciscan perspective, an understanding of God and the world, with imperfect beings. I'm reminded of an expression that's attributed to St. Teresa of Avila: God writes straight with crooked lines. I believe this pretty much defines how God is and will continue to work with all the members of the Franciscan movement. However we define our membership, God will continue to use our imperfect humanness, mistakes, insensitivities, lack of respect and care, breaches of trust, personal and collective struggles. God will use these to achieve the goal of his kingdom, just, inclusive, transformative, liberating love. What follows now are three stories told from a polycentric view. 2017, I had the wonderful opportunity while serving as Minister General servant of the order, Friars Minor, job for which I was little prepared and even having less skills to do so, I had the opportunity to visit the Laguna and Acoma Pueblo reservations in New Mexico and the Navajo Nation community of St. Michael's Mission in Arizona. At the Laguna Pueblo, friars and elders of Laguna people gathered in the church where they formally welcomed our delegation from Rome, together with provincials from what was formerly 7 United States OFM provinces. Following an open prayer and formal introductions, time was provided to the governor and elders of the Laguna Pueblo to offer a message. Now, normally under circumstances like this, these wonderful, great occasions, we're waiting for good news about all the wonderful things that the Franciscans and the Sisters of Blessed Sacrament and others have done over 100 years, all the wonderful stuff they've done to accompany the people. However, normal was not the order of the day, at least not normal in my mind and that of most of the friars present. The governor began to read a prepared text highlighting a series of injuries, of wounds, sins they felt had been committed by friars and on their outside pastoral agents, wounds which were the result of discrimination, racism, insensitivity, repression of their identity, spiritual imagination, and religious and cultural practices. To name some of these sins, the criticism had extended beyond the friars to include the hierarchical church, the American government, and other non-native peoples in the United States. Now, at first glance, you would have thought they're angry at the friars, but that they were just trying to strike back because they had a great opportunity there. They had the leader of the OFM world, and they could tell him, I did not believe then, nor do I believe today, this was the case. The Laguna governor did not name or shame any individual friar or external church leader. They used the occasion, the moment, to make clear the pain and wounds that they had experienced, and to do so before religious authorities they believed might be willing to hear their heart cry and who might have the courage to ask for forgiveness from them and their people. What followed, to my mind, was a moment of grace, a witness of the pastoral power of Franciscan movement. On behalf of the Order of Friars Minor, and the friars who served or who had served or currently were serving the Laguna people, I requested public forgiveness from them for the sins we had committed. Now, there are two types of sins. There are sins of commission, those actions which we consciously commit, breaking covenant bonds of fraternal love with people among whom we are sent to care for. And there are other sins, sins of omission, which occur mostly because of our failure to invest time, energy, our hearts into the lives of the people among whom we're called to serve. Our neglectful lack of awareness or sensitivity to the deeper needs of the people, our failure to allow their spiritual imagination and cultural practices to penetrate our protectionist inner walls and invite us to step out of ourselves and enter into their world, their experience, was a consequence of sin, of omission. The public admission of offense, the request for forgiveness were, to my mind, expressions of an effort to create a new space in which the flow of pastoral power of grace and love, healing and renewal could be reopened. Pope Francis reminds us that asking forgiveness is a means of healing relationships, for it reopens dialogue and manifests the will to reestablish the bond of fraternal charity. What followed the public request for forgiveness was a moment of divine mercy and grace. The governor and the other Laguna elders were moved to tears by the sincerity of their request for pardon. The governor, on behalf of his people, forgave the sins of the friars and asked the friars simply to leave those behind and begin a new partnership of enriching each other with our own unique cultural heritages. In many of his reflections on God's mercy and forgiveness, Pope Francis expressed the belief that these gifts from God contribute to creating new social space, fostering a culture of encounter, dialogue, mutual respect, trust, the opening of new possibilities for human fraternity and social friendship. It is in this space that human trust can be fostered and shared, giving rise to what he calls a multiform unity that generate new life. Franciscan power, pastoral power in action, an honest recognition of pain and hurt caused by pastoral agents, the humility to seek truth and pardon, and the grace to embrace reconciliation and healing. As Pope Francis wrote, it is an open and contrite heart that bridges distances between people, engendering intimacy, closeness, and human fraternity. I'd like to move now to the first story. It took me a moment to get there. Hope you're still awake. I'd like to take you to a country quite a distance from here, and to a war that nearly destroyed the youngest member of the community of nations, the wounds from which have never yet received adequate care and attention. I want to home in on the lives of Franciscans and their partners caught up in a conflict that demanded every ounce of courage, faith, and perseverance, translating into concrete acts the faith they professed. I believe it's in such moments of crisis where the full depth of the human experience, belief, values, and a consistent witness to the kingdom of God and to the power of Franciscan pastoral love in action are revealed. The pastoral power of love in action takes on a specific form when confronting the destructive forces of war, social disintegration, loss of loved ones and property, what Pope Francis calls a mission of healing the wounds of the heart, making efforts to set people free. In this sense, the Church, and by extension the Franciscan movement, are called to serve as field hospitals, a term that I really cherish deeply. Caring for wounded humanity, accompanying, being present to, and dwelling with God's people in a similar way of what St. John talks about in chapter 15 of the Gospel, the parable of the vine and the branches. Our story takes us to Juba, South Sudan, to Holy Trinity Parish Mission, where our OFM friars, working closely with lay Christian leaders, the central parish and its numerous mission outstations, and with 2 missionary school sisters of Notre Dame, shared in the pastoral life of a community traumatized by war, violence, loss of life and property, and living in a state of insecurity. Sometimes within the context of war, destruction, other crises, there arises within the human person and community a witness to the power of love, mercy, forgiveness, and humanizing fraternity. This can even take the form of social reconciliation, as you teach here, and healing, allowing new life and hope to emerge from the ashes. I believe this is what happened in the lives of the Franciscan friars, their lay partners, and 2 women religious who were caught up in untold violence in Juba, South Sudan. The year was 2012. That was when the friars, Franciscans, assumed responsibility for a mission and its multiple chapels spreading out south of the city of Juba to zones with little infrastructure, few resources, a region plagued by marauding armed groups and insecurity. The parish and mission had previously been served by diocesan priests and a small group of lay leaders. 3 friars were sent by the General Curia in Rome, and I was there at the time. I was not in charge. I was the deputy, but I was the one that helped set up the mission. They were sent to create a fraternity and to allow the fraternity to be in service to the parish and to the neighboring contiguous mission stations. During the early days, the friars dedicated themselves to the building of a prayerful, functioning fraternity, and neither of those are to be discounted, prayerful and functioning. They engaged local teachers to help them learn the basic structure of 2 languages. They had to learn Juba Arabic and Bari. They made great efforts to adapt to the sweltering heat and ferocious windstorms, the Habub. Sweltering heat, I remember being there at night. It would go down to about 100 degrees at night. So it wasn't unusual to get up and take 3 showers. You didn't sleep much. You spent a lot of time under the shower. The friars sought the advice of the lay leaders, the men and women in the parish, who had a deep knowledge not only of the local cultures and useful languages, they also understood how things really work, and particularly in informal economy settings, and where shifting political arrangements that govern commerce and official legal matters all depend on relationships. They learned about the history of the mission station, the nuances of social and cultural dynamics operative in the parish. This was particularly true in the parish they went to, Holy Trinity because of a broad mix of cultures, customs, spiritual understandings, and practices among the Catholic members of the church. During this first period, which is also called the missionary honeymoon, the friars felt drawn to the people, welcomed and protected by them, sharing much of the daily reality of the lives of the people as possible. What the friars experienced from the people was an amazing sense of welcome and careful attention to their needs, since the people of South Sudan, the people in the parish, recognized that they had come from a very different reality. So they were really sensitive to trying to help the friars take it easy and to ease their way in. The guardian of the fraternity at the time told me that the people felt comfortable with the friars because of something very unique that was they were witnessing to the local church, namely 3 men living and working together, a fraternity of brothers expressing harmony and peace that people noticed and appreciated. This is a very different experience, according to some of the people, than what they had experienced previously with some difficult diocesan clergy. Later in 2012, 2 missionary sisters arrived, the school sisters of Notre Dame. They joined the parish team. Following the advice of the parish lay leaders and friars, they developed a pastoral program among the women of the parish and in the neighborhood focused on health, education, and empowerment. A new layer of pastoral action emerged by way of a diversification of gifts, the incorporation of the religious women who helped strengthen the care for the women of the parish and young women. There were many challenges that the friars encountered and their lay collaborators and the sisters, those internal to the church, internal to the Franciscan Fraternity, and those related to the birthing of a new nation. South Sudan officially was recognized only in 2011. Internally, the friars encountered a church that suffered from a legacy of social divisions reflective of Sudanese politics, dating back to the 1950s. And in fact, fast forward in 2021, there was a planned attempt to murder the current Archbishop of Juba and another bishop in South Sudan because they were not from the tribe of the people, local tribe people. They were outsiders and for some unwanted. The principal drivers of these political tensions and divisions in South Sudan are very complex, and I can't go into all of them tonight. There's a competition of resources, land, water, oil, the revenues of oil, winners and losers. Anyone who studied complex situations predicts complex situations of social disorder, of war principally, understand. And then you add to that mix the proliferation of arms that just increases the suffering all the greater. By December 2013, various factors came together and Sudan experienced its first civil war. One of the areas in Juba that experienced the greatest violence and ethnic cleansing of Nuer peoples by the Dinka-controlled military took place in the very neighborhood where the friars, the sisters, the parish of Holy Trinity, and in the market areas. I recall listening to harrowing stories by the friars of bullets flying overhead in their home and how they were forced to sleep on the floor, covering themselves not with blankets, but with mattresses and anything else they could pile on to shield themselves from the crossfire. They talked about how, with trepidation, they went to local food stands to resupply their kitchen and to buy other household needs for the next day or two. As they went out, they found themselves walking between cadavers of rotting bodies, a killing field, mostly of Nuer men, but also of women and children, some of whom showed signs of torture and abuse. These stories were being told to me as they were unfolding from Juba to Rome by a cell phone. I was profoundly disturbed by the stories, obviously, but I was also deeply moved by the witness of the friars, the sisters, the lay pastoral agents, who, as soon as security conditions improved, created a type of field hospital attending to the physical, emotional, and spiritual wounds of the people. In that hospital, all were welcome, irrespective of their backgrounds, their cultures, their tribes. All received the same care as if they were the members of the one body of Christ. Progressively, the friars and lay partners began to adapt their pastoral outreach beyond the traditional parish to include care for some of the more than 25 to 30,000 internally displaced peoples huddled in plastic tents in UN-protected camps in and around the city. The friars and lay people created new educational programs for children and adults, constructed a makeshift tent-like social center. If you've ever seen that, if you can imagine, if you've ever seen pictures coming from war zones, these were tents are just out of plastic, and that's what all they had to protect themselves. That they constructed these temporary shelters so they could attend to the needs of the people. They committed to promoting a central message of forgiveness, healing, and peace. Because of this positive pastoral engagement for peace, the friars and others from Holy Trinity became recognized. They had a term, I don't know the term in Bari, but they were called messengers of peace. A special program was also developed in the internally displaced camps they visited to tend to the psychological and social needs of young people and teenagers. Because the young people and teenagers, the only thing they knew to respond to the injustice done to them was what they witnessed the adults doing. And so what they ended up doing was repeating the same patterns of violence inside the camps that took place outside. The Franciscans, together with the sisters and with the lay ministers from the parish, developed programs to attend to this. These tools became part of a wider parish effort to promote a new culture of nonviolence. Gradually, they were able to reclaim social space where people wounded by war and conflicts could experience the humanizing power of love and reconciliation. The Franciscan Movement, pastoral power for peace and reconciliation, present in the life of St. Francis of Assisi, which continues to speak through the Franciscan spiritual and intellectual living tradition. When looking at such life-threatening situations demanding courage, perseverance, and a little bit of craziness, frankly, perhaps anyone who's been to the war zones knows you have to be a little crazy to go. Perhaps it might come to you, when it came to me, you might be drawn to the question, how did they manage to survive, to stay with the people, to push on with the mission in the context of the threat to personal and collective well-being? However, when viewed through the Franciscan perspective, we find ourselves asking a very different question. It's not a matter of how. It's the deeper question, why did they choose to remain? I was aware of the friars even in these, I was on the phone with them sometimes 2 times a week, sometimes every 10 days. I was aware that they were talking about escape strategies. Could they go to a safer area in Juba? There really wasn't a possibility. Could they escape to Uganda or to Kenya? Maybe, but all the roads were mined and controlled by different competing groups. So the more the friars talked about motives for leaving Juba and Holy Trinity Parish, the more they realized they could not leave because they discovered how much the people loved and cared for them, the security risks people were willing to take to ensure their safety and well-being. They realized that they were progressively falling in love with the people who were no longer foreigners or strangers, brothers and sisters now, members of the one family, recognizing the one call to love and be loved. The friars and missionary sisters recognized a resilience in the Catholic members of the parish that flowed from their deep sense of trust, a heart knowledge that God would take care of them if they kept faith. Interesting, during that same period of time, I was in the General Curie. I was in comfort in Rome. I wasn't in this war zone. But someone in the General Curie said, oh, wouldn't that be interesting? We could have our first martyrs from South Sudan. I told that person, and I told several others who was listening, I said, you know, I've been on the phone regularly with the brothers. They never talked about St. Francis, about martyrdom. What they talked about was something very different. They talked about Francis's love for the people, his desire to create conditions for living in human fraternity and social friendship, and how these might serve as a means to survive and thrive in the crisis into which they had been plunged. I believe they discovered in the people of God in Juba, they were other beloved, trusted co-disciples, courageous witnesses to faith, hope, and love. And the friars, the reason they stayed, because they wanted to be part of this. They wanted to learn from the people about trust in God in the context of this war that was tearing people's lives apart. Human fraternity and social friendship, two powerful expressions of the Franciscan movement, expressions of pastoral love in action. Franciscans, though, are not the only ones who value and embrace human fraternity and social friendship. But Franciscans recognize there is no other way to experience the life and love of God, their inner experience of friendship with the Lord Jesus, without embracing humanity in all of its triumphs and tragedies, without embracing the entire cosmos. It's funny, in the months that followed the December 2013 war, the friars proceeded to allow these two expressions of the deepest values of the Franciscan movement to shape and reshape their engagement in the slow process of restoring some level of trust, attending to the wounds of the loss of loved ones, of loss of property, all the while promoting among the people of Holy Trinity Parish Mission in the neighborhood a spirit of love and care, a message of reconciliation and peace. Of immediate concern was for the friars and the sisters and the laity how to rehumanize the reality through daily interactions between all involved. The humanizing of the conflict zone was one thing, but when you get into the practical detail, how does it take place? And the friars talked about they needed to rehumanize this in all of their relationships. When they went to the meat sellers to get meat, they needed to check and see how the person was doing, the family. The same thing with the petrol operator, the women vendors from whom the friars purchased fresh tomatoes, sweet potatoes, fruits, and other staples, to the girls and boys who slowly returned to the parish to participate in religious and social activities, to the women's prayer and solidarity groups, to name but a few instances. A particular feature of the Franciscan movement of pastoral power is a commitment to create everywhere oases of humanity and fraternity. Several weeks ago, I was in conversation with this former guardian who I was in regular contact with during this time of war and its aftermath. He reminded me that he, the other friars, and perhaps also the religious sisters, he told me, he says, we were a little more than crazy for having remained to the parish. But he also stated in very clear terms how important the gift of fraternity was for the human and spiritual well-being of the friars, a fraternity that embraced the school sisters, the faithful lay leaders and parishioners, and others living around them in Jebel Market area in the parish. He remains convinced until today that the experience and witness to human fraternity, social friendship, and solidarity were driving forces for demonstrating in concrete yet simple ways the power of God's love and fidelity towards all people, towards the friars, toward the sisters, toward their lay partners, rehumanizing, bringing love into a space from which it had been stolen. The Franciscan movement is one that goes from the heart of God to the heart of the world and the evolving cosmos, sharing experiences of mercy and care, signs of the inbreaking of God's kingdom. This movement, according to Pope Leo, proceeds from the mind, from contemplation, spiritual imagination. It extends to the heart, affective intuition, and it's brought to perfection by expressing itself in concrete acts of love, effective action, performing the gospel in Franciscan jargon. This performance of the gospel involves for Franciscans a contemplation of all that is holy, a recognition of love present everywhere, a willingness to put these into practical service of humanity and creation. In the words of Leonardo Boff, everything in Francis, in St. Francis invites practice, leaving the imperial system, an alternative act that makes real more devotion towards others, more gentleness with the poor, and greater respect for nature. It was this release of the power of love, honed by the experience of human fraternity and social friendship, that reshaped the pastoral and missionary life of Holy Trinity Parish, and with it the lives of all those involved. At the same time, the friars had a burning question, something that the Kroc Institute would be very happy to hear. Why do people keep falling into the trap of inter-ethnic conflicts leading to death and destruction? The friars had no solution. They had no answer. But as a result of that, There have been several, now 2 generations of friars who've tried to develop programs for communicating a message of peace and reconciliation, even at the Catholic University in Juba, to try to move forward some thinking, some different way of perspective, to try to reimagine a world of conflict to become a world of peace. It's interesting, they've used the peace prayer attributed to St. Francis as one of the ways to try to convey the message. And the work that they did in the camps with the displaced camps with the youth, several UN officials on the ground recognized the importance of the work of the Franciscans and their partners from Holy Trinity sometime afterwards. A third story I'd like to share with you takes in this last story, unless we come up with more. It takes you to the Middle East for a moment, to the country of Syria. As a prelude, I call your attention to the opening words from a joint declaration co-signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Aqsa, Ahmed Al-Tayeb, signed February 4, 2019 in Abu Dhabi, a document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. They write this: faith leads a believer to see in the other a brother or sister to be supported and loved. Through faith in God, who has created the universe, creatures, and all human beings equal on account of his mercy, believers are called to express this human fraternity by safeguarding creation and the entire universe and supporting all peoples, especially the poorest and those most in need. Holy Week 2017, I took the opportunity, what an opportunity, to travel by car from Beirut, Lebanon, to Damascus, Aleppo, and Latakia in Syria with the former custos of the Franciscans in the Holy Land and 3 Syrian friars. Little had prepared me for what I would experience in Syria, where the civil war, marked by military engagement from local, regional, and international players, disrupted and destroyed the lives and property, tearing the country apart. During our 2-night stay in Damascus, our first stop, missiles could be heard flying overhead the Franciscan friary every 24 minutes, 24 hours a day. This had been the daily reality of people living in that part of the city since March 2011, and we were in 2017, to give you an idea. Following our brief stay in Damascus, we drove to Aleppo, located in the northern part of the country, traveling by way of an eastern road under the control of the Syrian government forces and its allies. By taking this road, we were able to avoid landmines, what a nice thought, and direct encounters with anti-government armed groups of various origins and intentions. We passed through a significant number of small and larger villages and towns, all destroyed, completely abandoned, lifeless. The only living things that we encountered along the route were a few trees, bright, beautiful spring flowers, and armed military groups overseeing the security checkpoints, and they were ubiquitous. But back to nature for a moment. The beauty, the sheer number and colors of the wildflowers served as a witness to the power of love over hatred, beauty over disfigurement, life over death. It was as if nature herself were crying out, as St. Paul talks about in Romans, screaming out at us, telling us life was not over. All was not lost. Hope was on the horizon, the promise of a new beginning for the people and the natural environment. The land and for the land were just one act of love, one gesture of forgiveness and peace away from becoming reality. 2 other noteworthy comments about this road that we took. First, a word about Shebat Air Base. You've never heard of it, perhaps. It's the infamous air base, the 50th Brigade of the Syrian Air Force, located in Homs. You might have heard about chemical weapons being used by the former president in Syria. This was supposedly the air base where they were being stalked. So, Homs was bombed by a former and actual president of the U.S., April 7, 2017, at 4:40 a.m. The date and time are very important for this reason, because we returned from Aleppo to Damascus on that day, 7 hours after the bombing by the American military, the American air strike. Interiorly, I thank God that I was traveling with my Irish passport. I'm dual citizen. But my non-American passport mattered little in a country where relationship is everything. Thanks to the incredible pastoral service of the friars in Syria before and during the war, their willingness to embrace and serve all people irrespective of religion, culture, or other differences, all the security checkpoints opened up for us. When they saw us with the habit on Franciscans, they all opened up. But I think it was something much deeper than the Franciscan garb. It was the life witness to human fraternity, social friendship, and solidarity by friars and their partners in ministry. Talk about the witness of pastoral power in action. As we entered the city of Aleppo from the east, the sheer magnitude of the destruction of war became immediately apparent. The entire eastern half of the city of Aleppo, the old city, was destroyed by government forces, armed militias, and by heavy Russian military bombardment in December 2016, 4 months before we arrived. What remained of the old city were shells of structures suggesting a once vibrant network of commercial and residential centers, government and school buildings, and Muslim and Christian religious structures. There had been 1.5 million people living in that part of the city prior to the war. 1 week after my return from Syria to Rome, I went with other Franciscan ministers general, conventual Capuchin, Third Order Regular, to meet with Pope Francis. During that meeting, I presented him a photo of a bombed-out Jesuit high school from the eastern part of the city, and a piece of wood from a machine-gunned crucifix with Jesus' lifeless arms and legs dangling in the air. Holding the photo and the wood from the crucifix, Francis paused in silence, took a deep gasp of air, and tears formed in his eyes. It was as if he had been transported to Aleppo or to another of the many killing fields around the world. Perhaps it was the pain of wounded humanity Pope Francis was holding in his hands and his heart, made visible through the splinters of the crucifix and the photo of mass devastation in Syria. The Franciscan friars of the custody, the Holy Land, have a long-standing presence, not in the west, but in the eastern part of the city, caring for the central cathedral, parish, and several other social services. It's interesting because as we got from the eastern part, to the western part of the city, it was virtually untouched. It was like a dividing line because it had been under the Syrian military control, and they protected that part of the city. So the friars, we stayed at a parish, St. Francis of Assisi Parish, which served also as the cathedral of the Latin Church. It was here where we met leaders of other Christian churches and Muslim religious leaders. It was also the Church of St. Francis where we encountered a large number of volunteers, Catholic, Christian, Muslim. In the midst of an ongoing, horrible, destructive, dehumanizing war, friars, Catholic religious women, parishioners, leaders from other Christian churches and Muslims work side by side to prepare and provide assistance in all forms to people in need. Talk about amazing grace. We visited the local hospital, staffed by several doctors, but one a Catholic doctor, a surgeon, who had been working without pay for almost 3 years. He spoke with a grateful heart, recognizing that none of his family members had been injured. They'd all been spared. For this reason, he told us there was no reason for him to complain about the lack of pay. His words, God will supply. God has always watched over me, over us. He was a friend of the friars. He talked about their witness. He said it wasn't just the food and the security, the other things they were providing for people, helping them get their records straight so they could get assistance from the government. It was the hope that they gave by their witness of their lives. They helped people not lose hope in the context of the war that was tearing their country apart. And he also said something else. He said, because of the hope that friars have the Franciscans are instilling in us, we've been communicating that to our young people who are fleeing or trying to get out. We've told them that go if you need to, but remember you have to come back. You have to come back to rebuild our city, to rebuild our country as a place for harmony, security, and peace. Talk about rebuilding the church, rebuilding humanity, falling into ruins. On Sunday, Easter Sunday, we celebrate the Resurrection Eucharist in a church filled with young, middle-aged, and older believers. They included members of the Catholic Cathedral Parish, the other Christian churches, the ones serving on the front lines helping people, and a small group of Muslim women and men. I was informed after the Mass, the Muslims present in the church were part of a service team. They had been part of this service team caring for the people of Aleppo and working closely with the friars. They were not in the process of becoming anything other than who they were. Authentic Muslim believers who recognized a shared humanity, who found consolation in celebrating together and giving praise to the one God over all, the one who is all merciful, all loving. One other outstanding feature, both of the charitable interfaith collaboration and the ritual moments shared together at St. Francis Cathedral in Aleppo on Easter Sunday, there was a deep sense of belonging to one human fraternity, of being gathered in friendship and solidarity, as if we were all in the same shared journey towards a common destination. And it's interesting because I took some notes. I don't have them now, but I recall taking a note. And in one of those notes, I noted that what came to me was the book of Revelations, chapter 21, verses 1 to 4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. And for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, the sea was no more. And I'll go on with that. God will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be present with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. There shall be no more mourning or crying, no more pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. I personally have never celebrated, and I've been in strange situations over the years of my life, a more powerful Holy Week and Easter resurrection than what I experienced in Aleppo, Damascus, and Latakia. A moment of grace and interconnectedness. Yet another lesson from the multi-centric church. When thinking about Franciscan movement, pastoral power, following the experience of this outpouring in Aleppo, I'm reminded of something Pope Francis wrote in his Transitus encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, signed at the tomb of St. Francis, October 3rd, 2020. He writes, St. Francis did not wage a war of words aimed at imposing doctrines. He simply spread the love of God. He understood that God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God. In this way, he became a father to all and inspired the vision of a fraternal society. Indeed, only the person who approaches others not to draw them into his or her own life, but to help them become ever more fully themselves, can truly be called a father and a mother. Franciscan movement, pastoral power in action, fueled by a universal force of love, communicated in and through the Incarnation, the practice of building human fraternity, social friendship, minority, and solidarity. If what I have described reflects key elements of the Franciscan movement, its pastoral power to the present, how do we need to prepare ourselves for the challenges coming from the future? Where is our pastoral power in action most needed as we move forward? And are we prepared to enter into and be transformed by and develop new perspectives, new vision? It's my hope that this conference will encourage us to embrace these questions and commit ourselves to this journey. Thank you for your kind attention.